The announcement came with brutal efficiency. It wasn't a declaration, not in the formal sense. It didn't need to be. The Vathari Dominion had a way of making their intentions clear without needing words. A fleet of 1,000 ships appeared on Earth's radar screens, too massive, too precise to be anything but a declaration of war. The Dread Spire, their planet killer, had arrived at the edge of the Sol system, which was the largest warship ever conceived by any civilization, a fortress with the power to erase whole planets from existence. This ship wasn't just a weapon, it was a statement. The Dread Spire hovered above humanity like a dark omen, its enormous form casting a shadow on everything below. Humanity's defenses, for all their strength, were no match for such a behemoth. The ship was equipped with weaponry capable of erasing cities, no matter how far humanity had come in its own technology. Earth had managed to survive the rise of empires like the Corinthian hegemony and the Zarathi Dominion, but the Vathari's weapon made all of that seem insignificant in comparison. The Dominion didn't just want to conquer. They wanted to wipe out the colonies that humanity had fought so hard to protect. Commander Joram Vex had never imagined Earth would face such a threat. Once a fleet officer of the Vathari Dominion, his life had been a reflection of the very systems he had once served, systems that rewarded strength and conformity. But those same systems had left him betrayed and discarded. Now, as an insurgent leader fighting for humanity's survival, he had witnessed firsthand the unrelenting march of power the Dominion had over the galaxy. He had been exiled, written off as a failure, but none of that mattered now. What mattered was the enemy in front of him. Vex had spent years fighting against his own people, using every scrap of knowledge and technology he had gleaned from his former role. He had led countless insurgent missions and fought to protect Earth's colonies, but when the Dread Spire appeared, the stakes had never been higher. It wasn't just about small strikes or sabotage anymore. The Dread Spire wasn't something that could be avoided or outrun. It had the power to destroy humanity in one sweep. Despite the overwhelming odds, something Vex had seen during his time in the Dominion's fleet sparked a glimmer of hope. The Dread Spire, despite its massive power, had a fatal flaw. The ship's size and design, its colossal scale, meant it was vulnerable in ways that could be exploited. In his past, Vex had studied the schematics of the Dominion's warships like they were second nature, and as he pored over the stolen data, one detail stood out: the ship's reliance on gravity tethers. The Dread Spire's weight was its greatest strength, but it was also its greatest weakness. To keep the ship in place and to support its massive structure during maneuvers, the Dominion had rigged the Dread Spire with a network of massive gravity tethers, a system designed to maintain the ship's stability. These tethers, while powerful, were also vulnerable to certain attacks. If they were severed, even partially, the Dread Spire could be thrown into chaos. This discovery was humanity's only hope. But there was more to the plan. Vex had spent years fighting for humanity's survival, with nothing but the ragtag remnants of Earth's forces at his back. He had seen how underestimated humanity had been by the galactic empires, and now he knew this was the moment where humanity's fate would either be sealed or they would show the galaxy just how wrong the Dominion was. But Vex didn't have the time to dwell on grand strategies. The time for action was now. His eyes moved over the holoscreen, displaying the Dread Spire's position in orbit, as well as Earth's pathetic fleet of defense ships, meant to look like a formidable deterrent, but in reality, a bluff. The real military power humanity had been hiding for years was still far from public knowledge, and now, with Earth's survival on the line, humanity would have to rely on stealth, guile, and the element of surprise. The Wisp, a small but advanced stealth frigate, would be Earth's secret weapon. Unlike the large warships the Dominion relied on, the Wisp was equipped with cutting-edge cloaking technology and experimental weapons designed specifically to fight larger ships. The ship's small size and stealth capabilities made it the perfect vessel to carry out a daring strike. The Wisp had been built with the help of former Vathari defectors, and it was capable of carrying one of humanity's last-ditch efforts, the nanite warhead. This was the second key to humanity's last stand. The nanite warhead wasn't a conventional bomb, but a complex viral code carrier that would disable the Dominion's ships. It had been reverse-engineered from the very same technology that the Dominion used to repair their warships. The warhead would infect the Dreadspire's systems, reprogramming the Dominion's self-repair nanites to turn on their own ship, disassembling it from the inside. It wasn't a weapon that would leave a massive explosion. It was a weapon of precision, meant to unravel the ship's core systems and render it helpless. As Vex observed the battle plans, the weight of the task ahead settled on him. There was no room for error. The Dreadspire had to be stopped before it could finish its mission. Earth had to act now with what little resources they had. The warheads had been completed, the Wisp was ready for launch, and the gravity tethers would be the key. But even knowing that, Vex couldn't help but feel a weight on his shoulders. Humanity was outnumbered, and even with their ingenuity, the odds were stacked against them. He took a deep breath, knowing the mission ahead would change everything, either for the better or worse. It was clear now that humanity could no longer hide behind false defenses. They had to fight, and Vex, once a disgraced officer, was now the one leading them into their final battle. The Dreadspire was massive, but Earth's will was even greater. And as the Wisp prepared to launch into the unknown, Vex knew this was no longer about survival. It was about proving the galaxy wrong. Humanity wasn't a weak species. They were ready for war. Commander Joran Vex stood at the helm of the Wisp, watching as the resupply freighter ahead of them drifted slowly toward the massive Dreadspire. The giant warship was a terrifying sight, its massive hull gleaming with weapon systems, armor plating, and countless drones buzzing in its orbit like a swarm of deadly wasps. Humanity's only hope rested on this small, stealth frigate, cloaked beneath the shadow of a seemingly innocent freighter. Vex's plan was deceptively simple. The Dominion was far too confident in their strength, believing their Dreadspire was unstoppable. But that arrogance had a blind spot, the gravity tethers that kept the colossal ship tethered to reality. Vex had discovered the flaw, and now it was time to exploit it. The Dreadspire's massive size required gravity tethers to stabilize it, and its enormous mass created blind spots in its defense systems. Humanity's only chance lay in taking advantage of that weakness. The Wisp, cloaked in the wake of the resupply freighter, had infiltrated the Dreadspire's perimeter unnoticed. Vex had calculated everything meticulously, knowing that even a 37-second window could be enough to slip past the Dreadspire's sensors. His crew of elite infiltrators had prepared for this moment for weeks, studying every detail of the Dreadspire's routine and sensor patterns. The freighter, scheduled to deliver supplies, would pass through the blind spots the Dreadspire's sensors created, while the ship's escorts were diverted to investigate false intel planted by Vex's team. His crew was ready. Vex's hand hovered over the controls as he spoke, voice low but steady. "Activate the cloaking. We have 37 seconds." The Wisp's cloaking technology flared to life, wrapping the ship in an impenetrable veil that rendered it invisible to the Dreadspire's sensors. The freighter ahead of them drifted onward, completely unaware of the ship hidden just behind it. The minutes felt like hours as the Wisp followed in its wake, carefully positioning itself until the exact moment arrived. At the right moment, the Wisp slipped into position next to the tether hub, a critical structure on the Dreadspire that controlled the gravitational systems. This was where the Dominion's reliance on gravity tethers could be exploited. Vex's team had studied the design, and now it was time to infiltrate. If they could plant a disruption device on the tether hub, it would send the Dreadspire into chaos, disrupting its stabilizers and weakening the ship's grip on the battlefield. "Everyone stay sharp," Vex said, his voice now cold and focused. "This is a one-way ticket, no room for error." The team of special operatives, including Nia, a seasoned hacker, and Thorn, a demolitions expert, quickly deployed from the ship's airlock. They glided silently down toward the tether hub, using their neural implants to communicate silently. The Dreadspire's automated drones hovered nearby, scanning the environment for intruders. It was almost too easy. Vex's plan had worked so far, the sensors were oblivious to their presence. The Wisp's invisibility had carried them undetected to this point. But now the real work began. As they neared the Tether Hub's perimeter, Vex activated a stolen neural implant from a previous raid on a Dominion outpost. The implant interfaced with the Dreadspire's security systems, bypassing the bulkhead's security lockout. Nia, her fingers dancing across her console, hacked into the system, allowing them to slip past the first line of defense. "That's the first hurdle," Nia murmured, her voice calm despite the tension. "We're in." Vex gave her a sharp nod. They had made it this far, but the real danger was ahead. The next phase would require them to disable the automated drones patrolling the hub. Thorn moved quickly, planting explosives to create a temporary distraction, causing a series of controlled detonations. The drones, momentarily confused, leaving a gap in their patrol patterns. Vex's heart raced as the team quickly moved forward, using the distraction to their advantage. They moved like shadows, blending into the machinery of the Dreadspire's interior. The air was thick with tension, the weight of the task ahead almost unbearable. Their goal was simple: plant the nanite warhead that would destabilize the ship's gravity tethers. But it wasn't just about planting the device. They had to escape before the Dreadspire's full wrath descended on them. As Vex's team made their way to the core of the hub, the Dominion AI monitoring the ship's security detected the breach. Bulkheads slammed shut with a deafening clang, sealing off certain sections of the hub. The team was now trapped, and the atmosphere in the room shifted from a quiet, almost eerie calm to one of palpable danger. "Shut it down," Vex ordered. "We need to override the atmospheric purge controls." "On it," Nia replied, her fingers moving with speed and precision, tapping commands into her implant's interface. She worked frantically, her brow furrowed as the AI's system fought back against her hacking. The purge system was designed to flush out unauthorized personnel, essentially turning the station into a vacuum. Without control over the system, they would suffocate. The seconds felt like years as Vex stared at the bulkheads, praying Nia could finish the override in time. Every second was one more chance for the Dominion to catch them. The purging system kicked in, sending a low whine throughout the hub, the air beginning to thin. A blast of cold rushed over Vex and his team, their breath freezing in the thin atmosphere. Time was running out. Finally, Nia's voice broke through the tense silence. "Got it! We're clear!" The atmospheric purge controls deactivated, and the pressure inside the hub returned to normal. Vex allowed himself a brief exhale. They had bought themselves a bit more time, but the danger wasn't over. The final step was to plant the disruptor device that would activate the nanites. They could not afford any missteps. As Nia fixed the final components of the device, Vex stood guard, eyes scanning the shadows. The next moment would be critical. The fate of humanity, and perhaps the galaxy, rested on this very mission. The metallic hum of the Dreadspire reverberated in Vex's chest as he crouched behind the bulkhead, his fingers trembling, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what they were about to do. The massive warship stretched out in every direction, an almost impossible sight. A weapon capable of erasing entire worlds, a gargantuan creation made to dominate. But humanity had found a flaw, a weakness hidden in plain sight. The gravity tethers that anchored the Dreadspire to reality were its lifeblood, but they could also be its undoing, and Vex's team was the one tasked with exploiting it. His team moved like shadows, silent, coordinated. They were trained for moments like this, their minds sharpened by years of desperate fighting against a foe that had never known mercy. Nia, the hacker, led the way, her fingers flying over the control interface of her implant, bypassing firewalls that would have sent most ordinary soldiers into a cold sweat. The Dreadspire's automated systems hummed with life, but humanity had something the Dominion never could have expected: ingenuity. As they made their way deeper into the ship, the team remained low, ducking behind columns of hulking machinery and glowing conduits, the steady hum of the Dreadspire's operation covering their movements. Vex couldn't help but marvel at the ship's size. The walls stretched far beyond what human eyes could fully comprehend, yet he knew every inch of it was a target, every corner a potential point of failure. The warhead they carried wasn't a bomb in the traditional sense. It was a tool of sabotage. a precision instrument designed to corrupt the very systems that kept the ship intact. If it worked, the Dreadspire would fall apart from the inside, its once mighty hull disintegrating as though it were little more than sand. Their destination was the communication array, the heart of the Dreadspire's command systems. It wasn't just the key to the ship's coordination, it was the nerve center, the part that connected the ship's systems to the rest of the fleet. Once they planted the nanite warhead there, the cascade of destruction would begin. The warhead would reprogram the ship's repair nanites, turning them from defenders of the ship into instruments of its self-destruction. "Stay quiet," Vex whispered, his voice a low growl. The air was thick with the smell of cooling metal and recycled atmosphere, and despite the ship's enormous size, the quiet was suffocating. Vex's heart raced, but his face remained impassive. This mission was humanity's last shot at survival, and he wasn't about to let that slip through his fingers. The closer they got to the comm array, the more dangerous the mission became. The Dreadspire was filled with automated drones, mechanical sentinels that patrolled the ship's internal systems. These drones had only one function: seek and destroy. As they approached the central hub, Vex's eyes scanned the area for any sign of movement. He had already lost too many good people to such machines. The team had no intention of becoming another statistic. Vex's. "Nearly there," Nia said, her voice steady, betraying none of the tension that wound its way through the rest of the team. "Just need to bypass one more set of security nodes." As she worked, Vex noticed the flicker of a drone's light at the far end of the hallway, its sensor scanning, moving erratically but steadily in their direction. Too close. "Move!" Vex barked. The team sprang into action. They darted behind an exposed support beam just as the drone passed them, its sensor light scanning the hallway just inches from where they hid. The tension was palpable, the seconds stretching like hours, but they didn't move a muscle. The drone passed by them, oblivious to their presence. Vex exhaled sharply. "We've got this," he muttered under his breath, but the words felt hollow, like a whisper in the vastness of the ship. This was the easy part. The hardest was yet to come. Nia's hands moved like lightning, her mind focused on the task at hand. The hacked neural implant she wore allowed her to directly interface with the Dreadspire's command systems, bypassing firewalls, scrambling codes, and cutting through the ship's security like a hot knife through butter. "Done," Nia said, her voice almost too calm in the charged atmosphere. The access point was open. "Get the warhead online," Vex ordered, nodding to Thorn, the team's demolitions expert, who had been standing guard. Thorn approached the device with steady hands, securing it in place next to the core of the comm array. His expression remained focused as he activated the device, the nanite warhead coming to life with a soft hum. "You're sure this will work?" Nia asked, her eyes never leaving the screens she was monitoring. "There's no other option," Vex replied, his voice grim. "We either do this or we all die." Thorn secured the final wires, his hands moving swiftly. "It's ready," he said. The warhead, small but deadly, was now a part of the Dreadspire's core. There would be no turning back. The air felt heavier now, the seconds ticking away like time itself was holding its breath. The team stood back, watching as the warhead activated. It was a complicated process, one that required the ship's nanites to be reprogrammed at a molecular level. Once it began, there would be no stopping it. And then it happened. A ripple moved through the Dreadspire, a subtle shift in the air as the nanites took hold. The ship's systems, designed for perfection and balance, began to tremble. A soft buzz filled the air, unnoticed at first, but steadily growing into a low hum. Vex's heart raced. He could feel it, the weight of history pressing on his shoulders. The Dreadspire had once been invincible, but now, for the first time, it was vulnerable. The ship that had been built to crush whole star systems was slowly coming apart. The warhead was working. Slowly, the ship began to disassemble, like a piece of machinery no longer needed. From the inside, the Dreadspire's systems broke down. Its once reliable self-repair nanites turned on their creators. Vex turned toward his team. "Get out, now!" As they made their escape, the Dreadspire's collapse had begun. The once mighty ship, now a shadow of its former self, was falling apart under the weight of its own hubris. Humanity had done what was thought impossible. They had struck at the heart of the Dreadspire, and now the ship was crumbling, atom by atom. "We'll have to move fast," Vex said, his voice steady but urgent. "The hard part's not over yet." The hume of the nanite warhead reverberated through the Dreadspire's corridors, a quiet yet deadly vibration that signaled the beginning of the end. Vex's team had done their part. They'd infiltrated the colossal ship, planted the warhead, and set it in motion. Now, all they could do was wait and pray that their gamble would pay off. "Is it working?" Nia's voice broke the tense silence, her fingers hovering over her console as she monitored the ship's systems. Sweat dotted her forehead, the pressure of their mission heavy on her shoulders. Vex's eyes narrowed as he watched the data streams. The Dreadspire's hull had begun to flicker in certain areas, weak points opening as the nanites started to reprogram the ship's own self-repair systems. The once impenetrable armor of the warship was now its greatest weakness. "It's working," Vex muttered, though the weight of the moment felt heavier with every passing second. He could feel it in his bones. The inevitable collapse of a ship that had been designed to be invincible. He clenched his fists, trying to calm his racing mind. There was no turning back now. The Dreadspire began to tremble. It started as a slight vibration, but soon the ship groaned in protest. Vex glanced at the readouts, his heart racing as he saw the nanites doing their work. The once pristine surfaces of the warship's hull began to shimmer, then disintegrate, atom by atom. The ship's very foundation was being torn apart by the very systems it had used to maintain its dominance. Nia cursed under her breath. "This is worse than I thought. The hull's failing faster than the warhead's calculations. It's like it's eating itself from the inside." Vex didn't have time to respond. He knew exactly what was happening. The Dreadspire, built to be a symbol of Dominion supremacy, was now a ticking time bomb. The nanites were breaking it down in a way no one had anticipated, eroding the core structure like acid on metal. The air inside the ship felt thinner, the vibrations stronger, as if the ship itself was fighting back, trying to keep its colossal form intact. But it was too late. The Dominion admiral, in charge of the Dreadspire's operations, had no idea what was happening. His arrogance had blinded him to the possibility of failure. In a panic, he ordered the ship to warp jump, attempting to escape the destruction before the collapse was complete. But the compromised gravity tethers couldn't hold. As the Dreadspire's engines powered up, the tethers that kept the ship anchored began to fail. The massive ship lurched violently as the warp jump activated, its weight too much for the failing tethers to bear. "What the hell?" Vex muttered, as the ship shook violently, lights flickering across the control room. He could feel it. The ship was coming apart. In a last-ditch effort, the Dominion admiral gave a frantic order to accelerate the jump, hoping to escape the collapse. But it was too late. The ship's gravity tethers snapped under the pressure, and with a terrible crack, the Dreadspire's hull tore open. The ship lurched violently as the force of the rupture ripped through its core. The resulting shockwave was so violent that it sent Vex's crew tumbling across the control room. The floor beneath them buckled and warped, and the hull screeched as it disintegrated further. The walls of the ship bent, and the bulkheads began to buckle inward as the Dreadspire's once pristine structure was torn apart like paper. Vex's team barely managed to hold on. The shuttle they had arrived in was far too small to withstand the massive shockwave, but they had no choice now. The escape had become their only option. Vex shouted commands, rallying his crew as they scrambled to stabilize the shuttle. The shuttle's engines roared to life as they made a break for it, but the ship's destruction wasn't over. They were caught in the wake of the Dreadspire's collapse. Vex gripped the control console as the shuttle jerked violently in the air. The shuttle's emergency systems beeped wildly, warning them of the impending danger. The ship's destruction had set off a chain reaction that was rippling through the entire fleet. The shuttle was being pulled into the wreckage, caught in the chaos of the imploding ship. "We need to get out of here now," Nia yelled over the noise, her fingers dancing over the controls. "We won't survive if we stay too long." The shuttle's stabilizers whined in protest as the crew fought to regain control. Vex clenched his teeth, eyes locked on the distant explosion that was the Dreadspire's final death rattle. He could see the massive debris cloud expanding in space, the remnants of the once mighty warship now reduced to rubble. It was an image of total destruction, a reminder of how humanity had brought down the Dominion's greatest weapon. But there was no time to savor the victory. The ship had already begun to fall apart around them. As the shuttle surged forward, they broke free of the explosion's range, but the damage was already done. The shuttle was struggling to maintain its course, and they were headed directly toward the debris field. As they flew through the chaos, Vex's eyes scanned the damage reports. The shuttle's shields were barely holding up, and radiation levels from the Dreadspire's collapsing reactor were dangerously high. Vex could feel the pain of the radiation coursing through his body. But there was no time to stop and assess. They had to keep going. "Brace for impact!" Vex shouted as the shuttle rocked violently, careening through the debris field. Pieces of the Dreadspire's wreckage smashed into their path, sending the shuttle spinning out of control. The crew fought to stabilize the ship, but the radiation had already begun to take its toll. When they finally managed to escape the debris field, their systems were barely functioning. The shuttle's power was running low and the crew was exhausted. Vex glanced at his crew, his thoughts already shifting to the next steps. They had survived the Dreadspire's collapse. But at what cost? "Status report," he ordered. "Shields are down, engines are offline," Neo reported weakly. "Radiation poisoning is severe across the crew. We'll need immediate medical attention once we get out of here." Vex nodded, looking out at the space around them. The once mighty Dreadspire was now just a graveyard, a place where the mightiest weapon in the galaxy had been reduced to nothing. Humanity had won, but the cost was high. The escape from the wreckage of the Dreadspire was nothing short of a miracle. Vex and his crew, battered and bruised, barely managed to hold the shuttle together as it careened through the chaos of the collapsing warship. The deadly debris field around them seemed endless, and the shuttle's systems, strained to the breaking point, were failing at an alarming rate. The radiation from the Dreadspire's reactor, now in its final moments of implosion, was frying circuits and adding an unbearable weight of urgency to every second they spent in the shadow of the wreckage. Vex's hand gripped the control panel, his knuckles white with the strain. He had seen the power of the Dreadspire firsthand. The largest warship ever built, a ship meant to annihilate entire colonies, to crush anything that dared defy the Dominion. Yet now it was in pieces, scattered across the vastness of space, its mighty hull torn apart by its own flaws. Humanity had delivered the fatal blow, and Vex had no intention of letting that victory slip away. "We can't stay here," Nia, the tech specialist, said, her voice strained with exhaustion. "The radiation's tearing apart the power systems. We need to jump before we lose everything." Vex nodded, barely acknowledging the pain in her voice. They were running out of time, and he knew they couldn't afford to linger in the aftermath of their success. The Dominion's retaliatory fighters were already on their tail, their sleek ships cutting through the debris field in search of the stolen shuttle. Every second that passed was another second closer to the moment when they would have no place to hide. "Brace for impact," Vex said, as he punched the shuttle's thrusters, pulling them out of the debris field and toward the nearby asteroid belt that offered a sliver of cover. The shuttle jolted forward, narrowly dodging a streak of plasma fire from a pursuing fighter. The fighters were relentless, tracking them with precision, but Vex had learnt the art of escape long ago. He maneuvered the shuttle in and out of the asteroid belt, using the jagged rocks as shields while keeping one eye on the rapidly depleting power reserves. Each time they took evasive action, Vex could feel the shuttle's systems groaning under the strain. There was no way to outrun the Dominion forever. "We have to send the broadcast," Vex said, glancing back at Nia, who was already working on the comms panel. "We need the galaxy to know what happened. We've won this battle, but the war isn't over." Nia's fingers danced over the controls. The Dreadspire's destruction. It's not just about the ship, it's about the message we're sending. The Dominion has been beaten, and that has to be broadcast to every system. With a few quick commands, Nia initiated the transmission. A beacon sent out across the galaxy, the video of the Dreadspire's collapse, the mighty warship's destruction, replaying the final moments of its disintegration. Vex's team had done the impossible, and now the galaxy would know. They had broken the Dominion's invincibility, and the message would echo across the stars. As the transmission went out, Vex's mind flashed back to the final moments before they had made their escape. The Dreadspire's death had been a monumental shift. The Dominion's flagship was gone, but more importantly, the message humanity had sent was one of undeniable strength. For once, the galaxy would know humanity as a force to be reckoned with. But the galaxy's reaction was not as simple as Vex had imagined. The Dominion fleet, crippled and in disarray, had no choice but to retreat. Their pride shattered, they withdrew from their aggressive positions, leaving their once-conquered colonies vulnerable. And then, as if on cue, the galaxy erupted. Systems that had long been under the oppressive thumb of the Dominion now found themselves free to act. Rebel factions, long suppressed, rose up against their former masters. The Swarm, the Corinthians, the Zarathi. They all saw the shift, the weakness in the Dominion, and they were ready to exploit it. The Dreadspire's destruction had sparked something more than just a military defeat. It was a signal that the old powers no longer ruled, that the galaxy was in flux, and that humanity had just changed the balance of power. "Look at this," Nia said, pointing to a monitor displaying several incoming signals from systems across the galaxy. "Rebellions, uprisings. The Dominion's grip is slipping." Vex could barely believe what he was seeing. The colonies humanity had built in the dark corners of space, once isolated and vulnerable, were now receiving messages of solidarity, of hope. Systems that had been under the Dominion's control for centuries now found themselves in a battle for freedom, and in the center of it all, Earth was the beacon. The Dreadspire's destruction had done more than just break a warship, it had ignited a movement. But it wasn't just the rebels who were watching. The Galactic Senate was no longer silent. The broadcast had reached the highest levels, and now the Senate was forced to respond to the fact that humanity had done the unthinkable. Some senators called it luck, others claimed it was a fluke, but they all knew one thing. Humanity had done something that the galaxy had not thought possible. Yet, for all the support Earth was gaining, the political establishment was wary. There were those within the Senate who were still reluctant to formally endorse humanity's actions. Senator Vorlan, who had been one of the loudest voices in suppressing Earth's warnings in the first place, now stood at the heart of a growing backlash. His corporate interests, which had long profited from the instability caused by the Dominion, saw the growing strength of humanity as a threat. Vorlan had no intention of allowing Earth to emerge as the dominant force. He would rather risk the continued collapse of the Dominion than admit to having been wrong. "Torren's not going to like this," Neil muttered, her voice thick with frustration. "We've shown the galaxy what humanity is capable of, and now they're going to have to acknowledge it." Vex watched the endless streams of messages and data rolling in. Humanity's colonies were rallying together, their courage ignited by the Dreadspire's destruction. Vex's tactics had proven to the galaxy that Earth wasn't just a survivor, it was a force that could change the course of history. The politicians back home might be hesitant, but the galaxy was waking up to the truth. The Senate's refusal to support Earth now seemed like an outdated relic of a time when humanity had been weak and isolated. The events of the last few days had shattered that perception. The galaxy had witnessed the destruction of the Dreadspire, and now humanity had a new place in the stars. "We may not be able to see it yet," Vex said softly, watching the stars outside the shuttle's viewport. "But this is just the beginning." And for the first time in history, humanity had truly earned its place among the stars. The Dreadspire's destruction echoed across the stars, its wreckage drifting in space like a monument to the end of the Corinthian hegemony's unchallenged dominance. The colossal warship had been a symbol of their power, a weapon meant to crush entire civilizations in a single blow. But now it was nothing more than debris, scattered across the void. The nanites that had disassembled its once impenetrable hull continued their work, breaking apart the ship's remains into fragments too small to salvage. The region surrounding its wreckage was now toxic, laced with unstable nanites that made it impossible to rebuild. It was a graveyard for the hegemony's ambition, a silent reminder of humanity's defiance. Vex sat in the dimly lit medical bay aboard Earth's flagship, staring at the display showing the wreckage of the Dreadspire. The pain in his body was constant, a reminder of the mission he had just survived. His mind, however, remained sharp. The destruction of the warship had sent shockwaves through the galaxy, but the consequences were only just beginning to unfold. Humanity had dealt a devastating blow to the Corinthian forces, but in doing so, they had also altered the galactic balance of power forever. The Corinthians were reeling. Their economy, once driven by the immense wealth from their conquest of dozens of worlds, was now in ruins. The destruction of the Dreadspire had crippled their military, and their once proud war machine had been dismantled by their own arrogance. Without their flagship, the Corinthian fleet was scattered and leaderless, their control over their empire slipping by the day. And it wasn't just the Corinthian forces that were affected. The client species that had been subjugated under the Dominion's iron grip were now rising in rebellion, emboldened by humanity's unexpected victory. The Senate's once stable system had cracked, and now the Dominion was fracturing under the weight of its own corruption and greed. "Vex, we need you to see this." Nia's voice broke through his thoughts. She was standing near the medical bay's communication panel, her face tight with urgency. Vex groaned slightly, his body aching as he moved to the screen. The feed showed a series of transmissions from multiple systems. Former client species of the Corinthians, who had begun broadcasting their own demands for independence. "Is this what I think it is?" Vex asked, his voice hoarse from the ordeal. "Yes," Nia confirmed, her eyes scanning the footage. "The client species are revolting. They're demanding the removal of Corinthian forces from their worlds. And they're not stopping there. They want reparations and autonomy." The Dreadspire's destruction lit the spark. Vex watched as, one by one, planets previously under Corinthian control began to erupt in open rebellion. Their once docile populations, who had lived in fear of the Dominion's iron fist, were now demanding their freedom. The galaxy had shifted. The Corinthian hegemony was crumbling from within, and it wasn't just the military that was falling apart, it was their entire structure. But with the Corinthians in chaos, a new opportunity arose. Humanity, once a fledgling species on the edge of the galaxy, now stood poised to fill the power vacuum left in the wake of the Dominion's collapse. The Federation, still cautious and wary of Earth's newfound strength, watched closely as Vex's tactics were hailed as a model for how a smaller, less technologically advanced species could challenge a galactic empire. The Senate, unwilling to publicly endorse Vex, nevertheless acknowledged the success of his mission. The political establishment, despite its reluctance to fully embrace humanity's role, could no longer ignore what Earth had accomplished. Vex's role in the victory, however, was a bittersweet one. Though he had saved countless lives and shattered the Corinthian war machine, he had paid a heavy price. His body, now fused with mechanical life support systems, was a testament to the sacrifices he had made. He was alive, but not in the way he had once been. His mind, still sharp, was the only part of him that remained intact. And yet, he couldn't bring himself to be the symbol that so many others seemed to see him as. He wasn't a hero, he was just a man who had done what was necessary. As humanity's fleets began to grow stronger, bolstered by the technology they had scavenged from the Dominion's wreckage, Earth found itself at a crossroads. Vex, despite his injuries, remained a reluctant leader. His body was now kept alive by a network of machines, a living tactical computer, but his spirit was unbroken. He knew that this victory was only the beginning. The swarm had been dealt with, and the Corinthians had fallen, but the galaxy was vast, and new challenges loomed on the horizon. Humanity had become a galactic power, but with that power came responsibility. Earth's fleets, now equipped with nanite pneumalizing shields, began their missions to protect the colonies that had been ravaged by the swarm's assault. Earth's leadership was beginning to solidify, but it wasn't just about military might. Vex knew that for humanity to thrive, they would need to build alliances not just with former enemies of the Corinthians, but with any species willing to stand beside them. The Senate, despite its fractured state, had reluctantly recognized Earth's potential. But the Federation, wary of Earth's growing strength, still saw humanity as a wild card. The galactic community had watched as Earth went from a fledgling species to one capable of challenging the greatest empires in the galaxy. Now, the galaxy's political landscape was changing, and Earth was at the center of it all. But for Vex, the cost of this victory was clear. He was no longer the man he had been. His body, fused with life support systems, would never be the same. Yet, despite everything, he couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Humanity had done the impossible. They had not only survived the swarm, but had shattered an empire. The Dread Spire's destruction was a symbol of their strength, but the true victory lay in the alliances they would form, the challenges they would face, and the future they would create. As Vex looked out into the stars, the weight of his journey was clear. Humanity had proven its place in the galaxy, not through brute force, but through ingenuity, strategy, and unity. And for the first time in history, Earth was no longer just a footnote in the galaxy's history. It was a force that would shape the future. But Vex knew that their victory would not be the last. The galaxy was vast, and the challenges were far from over. Still, humanity would stand ready, united and unyielding. They had proven that they could take on the impossible and win. The galaxy was changing. What had once been a backdrop to humanity's struggle for survival had turned into a stage for their rise. The fall of the Dread Spire and the swift collapse of the Corinthian hegemony had left a void, and humanity had positioned itself to fill that gap. No longer the underdog, Earth had become a force of influence, one that was reshaping the political landscape across the stars. But this was only the beginning. As the galaxy reeled from the shock of the Corinthian defeat, something unexpected began to happen. The Zerathia, once the most loyal and powerful supporters of the Dominion, began to defect. The once indomitable alliance between the Dominion and the Zerathia was now crumbling. Their proud military, once known for its brutal efficiency, had watched the Dread Spire's destruction, seen humanity's victory, and begun to question everything they had fought for. The Zerathi realized that the power balance had shifted, and with that realization came fear. The first defectors were small groups of Zerathi soldiers, then whole platoons, and eventually entire fleets. They sought refuge with humanity, offering their services in exchange for protection. Earth, still reeling from the victory, saw an opportunity. Torren, the de facto leader of humanity's resurgence, quickly recognized the value of these new allies. The Zerathi, once enemies of humanity, now offered their advanced military tactics, their knowledge of Dominion tech, and their experience in galactic warfare. But the Zerathi defectors weren't the only ones looking to realign themselves. Former pirates, scattered across the galaxy, were now seeing an opportunity to unite under Earth's banner. They had long lived in the shadows, skirting the laws of the galaxy and carving out a living on the fringes. But with the collapse of the Dominion and the emerging power of Earth, they saw a chance for legitimacy, for protection, and for a stake in the galaxy's future. With the Zerathian pirates now on their side, Earth began to forge new trade deals and diplomatic pacts. The galaxy watched, as once feared enemies were now working with humanity to rebuild what had been shattered. The Zerathi defectors brought with them their knowledge of Dominion technology, helping Earth rapidly advance their fleet and military capabilities. The pirates, skilled in raiding and guerrilla tactics, became invaluable allies, assisting in securing the trade routes and ensuring Earth's growing influence could be maintained. The alliances formed by humanity were not just military pacts. They were the first steps toward uniting the fractured galaxy. For the first time in history, humans were not just passive players in galactic politics. They were driving the conversations. Earth's newfound strength was forcing factions, both old and new, to reconsider their position in the galaxy. And in the wake of this shift, Earth had become the central figure, the new power that could no longer be ignored. Vex's victory, the catalyst for this transformation, had become a rallying cry for the galaxy's oppressed species. His actions, the destruction of the Dreadspire, and the strategic genius behind the attack had proven that humanity could not just survive, it could dominate. The rebellions that had sparked across the Dominion's former colonies now saw Earth as their leader. No longer were they content to live under the yoke of a crumbling empire. Now, they saw a future in which they could stand alongside humanity, not beneath it. This new reality was not without its challenges. Torren, still reeling from the weight of his own survival and leadership, found himself at the forefront of a diplomatic storm. His leadership had been crucial to humanity's survival and subsequent rise, but with this new power came new responsibilities. The political establishment back home was still cautious, unsure of how to navigate this new era. The Federation, still wary of humanity's sudden rise, was reluctant to embrace Earth's newfound role. Yet as the months passed, it became clear. Humanity was no longer a side player in the galaxy's great game. They were an undeniable force. Torren's leadership became the anchor around which Earth's resurgence was built. As the head of humanity's military forces and the symbol of their triumph, Torren became the face of this new era. He wasn't a figurehead, he was a symbol of the strength and strategy that humanity had developed in the darkest of times. While some questioned his decisions, others saw him as the key to their future, a leader who had brought them from the brink of extinction to the center of galactic power. His work, however, was far from finished. The galaxy had begun to take notice of humanity, but that was just the beginning. There were still factions that sought to disrupt the new order, and while Earth's military was powerful, it was still vulnerable to those who would seek to undermine their progress. Torren knew that this newfound strength had to be managed with care. The alliances they had built, though strong, were fragile, and the galaxy was still a place filled with enemies, waiting for their chance to strike. As Earth began to solidify its place, Torren looked ahead to the future. There was no longer any question about humanity's place in the galaxy. They had proven themselves not only as survivors, but as a power that could shape the future. But as he gazed out at the stars, he knew that this was only the beginning. The galaxy was changing, and humanity would be at the heart of that change. They had proven that they could survive anything that was thrown at them. Now it was time to prove that they could lead. The galaxy's reaction to Earth's rise was one of awe, fear, and, for some, begrudging respect. Humanity had proven that they were more than just a fringe species, more than just survivors. They were becoming the architects of a new future, one that would shape the balance of power for centuries to come. The question now was not whether humanity would rise, it was how far they could go, and whether the galaxy was ready for a future with Earth at the helm. The echoes of the Dominion's collapse reverberated through the galaxy. Once a colossus that had ruled with fear and absolute control, the Zorathi Dominion had crumbled, leaving only remnants of its former self, fractured, disorganized, and in disarray. The power vacuum left behind was vast, spreading across once loyal territories, now in chaos. Former subject worlds, once terrified to even whisper against their overlords, began to reclaim their autonomy. Rebellions that had long simmered in the shadows now erupted in full force, as their oppressors, without a leader, could no longer maintain their grip. And in the wake of this collapse stood Earth, humanity stronger than ever before. The once fragile, insignificant species that had nearly been wiped out, then dismissed as weak, had now become a dominant force. The wars fought, the battles won, and the alliances formed had all been steps in a journey that would forever reshape the fabric of the galaxy. Humanity's fleets, now bolstered by the best technology from the remnants of the Zorathi and the remnants of the Corinthian hegemony, were among the most formidable in the universe. But it was not just the strength of Earth's military that had earned their place in the galaxy. It was their commitment to preserving peace and stability in a fractured galaxy that had once thought only in terms of domination. Earthers stepped forward, not as an empire looking to conquer, but as a force that sought to prevent further bloodshed, to preserve the peace earned at such a high cost. The galaxy watched in awe as humanity's role as a peacekeeper became undeniable. Where once they had been seen as just another species among countless others, now Earth's military might and diplomatic weight gave them an unparalleled influence. The Federation, which had been so hesitant to offer humanity full membership, now saw Earth as an indispensable partner in maintaining order. The balance of power had shifted, and Earth was now at the helm. But at the heart of it all was Vex, Commander Derek Vex, the reluctant hero who had saved humanity from the brink of annihilation. His actions, bold and calculated, had forever changed the course of history. Vex's legacy was no longer just a tale of survival. It had become the foundation upon which the future of humanity and the galaxy would be built. His name was spoken with reverence, and his decisions were studied in academies across the galaxy as a testament to the power of strategy, ingenuity, and sacrifice. The once grim reality of humanity's existence, isolated, dismissed, and vulnerable, had been shattered by the success of Vex's daring actions. He had become a symbol of what humanity was capable of when pushed to its limits. From the depths of Earth's darkest hours, he had risen as the galaxy's unlikely savior, not through sheer force, but through understanding, innovation, and the will to fight when all seemed lost. Despite this, Vex never sought the spotlight. He remained a humble figure, his body now fused to a life-support throne, his once acceptive limbs now immobilized by the consequences of his mission. Yet, his mind remained sharp, his will unbroken. In many ways, his sacrifice had been greater than any victory, and he had never asked for accolades. He was a symbol of what humanity could become. Not a conqueror, but a protector, a leader in the true sense of the word. As humanity began to rebuild, its influence spread further than ever before. The galaxy's former power structures, once dominated by the Corinthian hegemony and the Zarathi dominion, had crumbled. No longer could the galaxy rely on those ancient powers to dictate the future. Earth had become a beacon of hope, of change, and of strength. And as the last remnants of the dominion scattered into the depths of space, Earth stood at the center, ready to guide the galaxy toward a future of cooperation and peace. But humanity's work was far from finished. The galaxy was vast, and with each new alliance, each new territory claimed, new challenges emerged. The remnants of the old power structures had been torn down, but the void they left behind was not without its dangers. Factions still rose up, and while peace was the goal, the path forward would not be without its trials. Earth's fleets, now stronger and more advanced than ever before, stood ready to face whatever new threats might emerge. They would not shrink back. They had learned too much, fought too hard, and sacrificed too much to allow their newfound peace to be shattered. As Vex watched the stars through the viewport of the command center, his mechanical voice box transmitting his thoughts, he couldn't help but feel a quiet sense of accomplishment. The galaxy was no longer indifferent to humanity. They respected them, feared them even. And though the scars of war would never fully fade, humanity had proven itself to be more than just survivors. They had proven themselves to be a force that could shape the future, a power to be reckoned with. In the end, the message was clear. Humanity had been left for dead, but they had risen from the ashes, and now the galaxy would kneel before them, not in submission, but in acknowledgement of their strength and resilience. The legacy of Commander Derek Vex, of humanity's fight to survive, would echo through the stars for centuries to come. The age of humanity had begun, and nothing would ever be the same again. The galaxy would never forget the day humanity turned the tables, and they would remember the price humanity had paid to ensure their place in the stars. As for Vex, though his body was now a shadow of what it had once been, His mind would forever guide the galaxy toward a future of peace, prosperity, and unity. Humanity had proven that no matter how bleak the future seemed, they would never again be left for dead. The future was theirs to shape, and they would shape it on their own terms. What do you think of humanity's rise in the galaxy? Would you have supported Vex's mission or taken a different path? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button for more thrilling HFY stories. The best is yet to come.